And I am the Executive Director of the Vermont Council on World Affairs. And we are very pleased to be sponsoring this event together with the Fletcher Free Library. Thank you to the library for the facilities and for the hosting. They've also provided books for everyone to buy after the presentation if you so desire. Before I introduce Brian, I just wanted to put in a few plugs for the Vermont Council on World Affairs. We have a lot of speakers and events that are coming up all the time. We have a little propaganda piece right here, which is on the table, and I urge you to take. And I also want to point out one specific event. We have a tour coming up to the Port of Montreal. Montreal is the world's largest inland port, and this is a fascinating tour where you get to go inside the port and onto a container ship. And that is next Friday, so we really encourage people to sign up. We have a couple of spots left, but we need to send all the information to the Canadian authorities, passport and that kind of thing, quite soon. So if you're interested, please take a flyer and sign up quickly. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. I printed out a very nice biography, and I left it on my desk. I will just come and give you a few highlights. Brian is, as you all know, a native of Jericho. And he's a They actually, when they inquired about this, they said that he was from somewhere in Vermont. So I know somewhere in Vermont was. And it also said in the information that he had worked summers at the Burlington Boathouse. So I figured that was somewhere in this neck of the woods, although the boathouse is now practically in the water. He's a former intern for Senator Leahy. He's a graduate of Haverford College, and he is now working at the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C., and he writes for The Atlantic. Brian, thank you.
Thank you all for coming out on such a wonderful night in Burlington. I don't know how few those everyone gets. So actually, I want to start in June of 1990 with an incredible woman, a woman that the British Independent once called a Viking warrior incarnate. And she's in Oslo, Norway. She's the former Norwegian Prime Minister. And she's waiting for Mikhail Gorbachev to come accept the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's been putting this off for months. Finally arrives. They do all the ceremonies, all the bilateral, and it was just the two of them. There's no KGB men in the room, none of the staffs. He grabs her hand at the table. He says, "I don't have control of this country. I don't know what's going to happen." She says it's one of the most shocking moments of her life. And she told me about it when we met at Rome in Nice last summer. So I want you to hold on to that, because it's a critical moment for all of us. We have no idea it's happening. Some of us are nowhere near born yet, but it's big. So I want to speak first about what drove me to go on this little adventure. I want to speak about some of the lessons that I've pulled from these leaders. And I want to speak about what it means, sort of for us, for this millennial generation. So, what should have been my senior year of college, I ran away a little bit. I was kind of worried about the real world and felt like we had to know what we were doing once you got out there. I think I've proven that that's not really true. So I took off, and I found myself following these candidates through New Hampshire, through Iowa, Obama and Hillary, and McCain and Dodd and all these guys. And one of the things you realize quite quickly is that only these fringe candidates seem to be speaking really honestly. You know, there's an adage that the biggest gaffe in Washington is telling the truth when you're not supposed to. And there's another one that nobody gets elected by promising to raise taxes. So every president since I've been alive has cut taxes. It's sort of this compromise. You elect us and we find ways to give you your money back. But now we see a nation with the lowest tax burden since 1950. We see a nation where half the public is paying no federal income tax. It's paying into Medicare, they're paying into Social Security. So I'm on this road, I'm listening to all these guys in these tiny, tiny halls. And one of the other things you realize is you have to be insane to do this. You absolutely have to be crazy. You end up doing the same speech 15 times a day. And at one point, I'm with Edwards at in Loudonderry, New Hampshire, at this Stonyfield yogurt, you guys know this stuff. And we're just walking around, and I say, it's about 5 of us, 5 reporters and editors, just a pointless endeavor. I say, Senator, what's your favorite kind of yogurt? And he stops, and he just, he's kind of got that doughy look off him. And he doesn't answer. And all these reporters are kind of looking at me, what have you done? Like, what did you say? And finally he goes, it's vanilla. Vanilla? This guy 3 minutes to think vanilla? But you realize these are very normal people. They have bad breath. They say uninteresting things. And we sort of put them on this pedestal. But it comes from us. It comes from our collective attention. So, that frustration was there. The sense that we just weren't getting the right messages. To go back to Grow, she said, listen, we're just not giving the people the right messages about the complexity of all of this. So when you see candidates saying common sense solutions, that's how we can solve all this. That's just a false premise. And it's damning that that's what we're telling publics. So let me go back to Gorbachev and Grow. A year after, he's in Norway. He does something that nobody in his government wants him to do. And that's he goes to the G7 summit in London. And he doesn't go as a representative of one of the greatest powers the world has ever known. He goes hat in hand, searching for help. So this system has control of everything. It's control of the press, and the economic side, it's control of prices, property, trade, everything is managed from the center. And the whole time Gorbachev is doing his reforms, he's keenly aware of Khrushchev, who tried this stuff after Stalin, and they wiped him away. He got nowhere, right? So he knew you had to start on politics, and he opens the system politically. He has a vibrant press that's assaulting him pretty much every day. Reporters in Russia at this point, they have the stature of physicians, of lawyers. And so he comes to the G7, hat in hand, and he says, we've cobbled together $50, $70 billion to save tiny Kuwait this year. We need that kind of money. The Russian people need that to ease the economic transition. They turn him away. His translator says the entire thing felt like an interrogation. This little Napoleonic Japanese prime minister named Kai-Fu said, you have this plan to freeze 70% of prices this year. That's not good enough. So he goes back, and 3 months later there's a coup. He survives, his wife has a stroke, his daughter has a nervous breakdown, and Yeltsin comes to power. And these reforms that Gorbachev said should take 20 years, Yeltsin says, we can do this pretty quickly. And Jeffrey Sachs and a number of people at Harvard agree. And in 3 months, he frees it all. Prices, property, trade, stroke of a pen. And half a dozen oligarchs make off with all of it. The entire wealth of the Russian people. But the kicker in all of it is we end up giving them the money. Clinton gives $7 billion by the time he's done. Bush will give another $3 billion. The World Bank gives, $12 billion. IMF, $22 billion. So we give them the money anyway. But we do it in a way that guarantees they implode. That guarantees they don't have a chance. And it's because we're still locked in that Cold War thought. And we are still today. Very much so. And that's something that comes across from a lot of these folks, is that we didn't really have the mental agility in that moment. Paul Keating from Australia might be my favorite politician in the book. And he says, in the epiphany at the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall coming down, the first chance since 1914 to recut the world into a cooperative representative structure. And we missed it. We absolutely missed it. So, I did a great event last night in New York with a former UN Undersecretary who negotiated for the Soviets to leave Afghanistan, who traded himself to Hezbollah for a dozen hostages in Lebanon. And he said it is the nature of a weak state to build enemies. And so when you see Hillary Clinton saying the Chinese system is doomed, and you see Obama speaking to domestic audiences and sort of dwelling support for people's fear of China, you see that again in a lot of ways. And it worries me. So let me speak a little bit about some of these lessons. The first one, and this is more on the side of the lesson, but thing you realize is that they all lose. Clinton, Tony Blair, both Bushes, FDR, Reagan, you climb back, and all of these guys have serious, serious defeats somewhere in their careers. But they go back, right? They're incredibly resilient people. Overwhelmingly, they wish they had been more focused, that they had concentrated on fewer goals and used their political capital in a much more focused way. But the most important thing that comes out of all of it is a lesson on public opinion. You know, they agree that public opinion and support for a leader, himself or herself, matters a great deal. But on individual issues, it really doesn't. And all of them say, we're constrained by this, that politicians are absolutely enthralled with public opinion. You know, the most important example is Ehud Barak, this great Israeli who I admire a great deal. He's currently the defense minister. And in 2000, he went to Camp David, Bill Clinton, and Yasser Arafat, and he came not as close to peace as many people would like to believe, but they came quite close. And there's a lot of discussion about all of this, but the important thing is the story he was telling the whole time he was there. And it's about Begin, who made peace with Egypt in 1979. And it was all of these deals. That's the other thing you realize. Kashmir, we know what the answer looks like. Israel-Palestine, we know what it looks like. It's just getting there, right? So with Egypt, it was land for peace. This vast Sinai Peninsula, just a desert wasteland. I drove across it one summer, kind of just for kicks. There's nothing there. You'll find these burnt out fuselages of trucks and buses, and there's Egyptian soldiers. They're guarding them in the middle of the night. And why is that? It's a jobs program. It's just a way for Egypt to keep people on the payroll. But there's nothing here. No strategic value, no hydrocarbon, nothing. And so when Begin goes, he knows he has to trade this for recognition for a peace deal. And when he gets there, a third of his public supports him. They say, yeah, this is a good idea. But the moment they deliver it, as soon as they can sign a peace deal, 2/3 of his public is behind him. So for Barak, it showed the transformative nature of just getting it done and managing to seal the deal. And this is the other incredible thing, while he's there, he offers the unconscionable. He offers, under the guise of American authorship, to divide Jerusalem, to give back the Christian and the Arab quarters. And at that moment, 45% of the Israeli public supports it. So we can extrapolate, right? We can see where those numbers go if they actually sign the deal. Clinton in 1980, he's 34. He just lost re-election for governor. It's his second defeat, actually. And he goes to the University of Arkansas. I found this University of Arkansas Law School book. It's just, nobody's touched this thing in decades. And one of his colleagues talks about this lecture where he comes in and says, great politicians don't give a rip about public opinion. It's, wow, it's pretty bold, Clinton. This is the guy whose pollster writes in his book. If you give Clinton numbers, don't even bother talking to him. He's just in it. He just devours these things. And so I said, is this true? He said, yeah, I think that's still true. He said, I think you're naive if you don't know where the public is. But any poll is a picture of a horse race that's nowhere near over. And you're hired to deliver. You're hired to deliver for the American people. You can't lead from the median of public opinion. There's this old West German chancellor. He's 92. And I saw him in his office in Hamburg. And this guy literally smokes a cigarette every 7 minutes, all day, every day. And you have to scream at him, right? Because he's so deaf. So I'm in this office that feels like 1974, trying to go cigarette for cigarette with this guy. And he says, it would be great for the fate of democracy and the rest of this world if we did away with all public opinion polls. I thought that was pretty great. And Keating, probably my favorite, he says, the worst thing that can happen to you in public life is that you lose your job. So why behave as a weakling? Why behave as someone who lives on polls? So, a little bit about this generation. So I mean, I asked them all. I said, did this generation fall short? Will history judge the post-Cold War leaders very harshly? And overwhelmingly, they say, yeah. Yeah, it will. But Clinton fights me on it, right? Because he was in charge. This was his world then. and another guy from Singapore, whose tiny island that's fascinating in a number of ways, but which could have never matured into a first world state basically overnight, if not for all the economic opening. Those are the only two who say, no, I don't think so. And Clinton says, the world's more complex. It says, I don't think they're defective generations. You just have to hand off the baton, and it's a relay race. And we have no idea if the greatest generation facing climate change would make very hard decisions that they think would mean a suffering and economic prosperity. So, I mean, I disagree with it. I think generational character matters a great deal. And we're intriguing people because you guys hate institutions. You don't trust government. And a lot of it was born out of Vietnam. A lot of it was born out of Reagan saying government is inherently failing and inept. We don't come down that way. And we're also sort of a generation of technocrats. We love things that work, you know? We're sort of an on-demand generation. That gives me great hope in some ways, and it also worries me in a number of ways. The first thing you have to realize is that what a population demands of its government means a great deal. You know, we're reluctant to talk about national character in this country. We got a very healthy dose of the French Enlightenment, but it matters. It really does, and there's a reason Japan and Germany rebuilt themselves quite quickly. And there's a reason that Russia, 2 decades on, is still languishing. A big part of it, is the way other states interacted in both those situations. But character matters too. You know, if you have experienced great law and great order, and you've benefited from those opportunities that come with it, you will demand them again and again if you have the chance. Helmut Schmidt, that German, said, if you took the American healthcare system with a sixth of people uninsured, and you put it in Europe, there would be revolutions. There would be revolutions across this continent, because that's something they demand of their government. So we as a generation are going to have to change what we expect and what we demand. And we're going to have to shed what Reagan taught, what Reagan just seared into the American character, the idea that government has to fail, that it can never be agile and efficient. Because if you look around this world, if you think about climate change, I have to tell you, you know, there was a point where 70% of this country at least thought the globe was warming. They weren't sure if it was human-driven, but they were convinced it was warming. It's 2006. We're like less than 30% on that measure now. But when you talk to people at CIA, when you talk to people that work at the Pentagon, this is not an if question. Climate change is real and has very serious implications for national security. You know, scarcities of water, scarcity of oil, and arable land. There's a serious question whether the planet can sustain 9 billion people, and that's what we'll have by 2050. So all of these forces are moving us towards a much more anarchic world, to a lot more governments faltering and failing. The last 3 summers we've seen food riots in 25 major world cities. That world demands government that moves well and that moves decisively. So we've got a great challenge, but we are also a talented generation. And I think the first step is recognizing it for what it is. And there's a perfect storm in some sense in that news in this country has declined a great deal. And our faith in leaders has declined a great deal. But I'm not sure we're out of the game, not by any stretch. But I thank you all for coming. I'm thrilled to take questions, and I'll draw more from the book a great deal as we do that. But thank you. I appreciate you being here.
Not that it's totally pertinent, but I'm a veteran, and I will say I use the VA hospital. And so when we talk about Reagan type of comments, the government doesn't work, the VA works very, very well. The health care that some of us are getting out of the VA is phenomenal, okay? But my question is that we're talking about power, the context that you shared. I'd like you to comment on a different context. That we have a nation of global predator, disaster, monopolistic, socialistic corporations these corporations are the power that are driving everything, separate from the dynamic of talking about countries and the people of power that you were referring to. So could you talk about power in that context and what your opinions are?
Yeah, I think the most dangerous man in America is John Roberts, without question. I think the fact that the Supreme Court is changing a serious precedent in this country about the way we do campaign finances is worrisome. The right side of this country will say, yeah, but unions have always given money to candidates, so if we bring in corporations and let them support candidates too, there's some parity there. I mean, the truth is, we're post-partisan as a generation, and that's very good. We don't sign up as Democrats or Republicans because we really don't care. We want it to work. And I think it's intuitive to us that it doesn't matter if it's Soros money, it doesn't matter if it's Koch money. The fact you have people on Capitol Hill spending 50, 70% of their time trying to get back there inherently poisons politics. And it's another thing to have that realization manifest. But I think one thing that comes across quite clearly is that in moments of crisis, if you speak to a public and you show them the whole course of action you want to take, they can follow to a tremendous extent. This guy Keating says, I'm sort of asking about how he took this, what he called a rust bucket economy in the middle of nowhere in South Asia, turned into an economy that avoided the global recession for the most part. An economy that has had real wages increasing over the last 30 years when we have not. And he says, if you want to lead, it's a bit like a street through the crowd. If you move fast enough, if you move with enough confidence, that crowd will always part. But the moment you stop, or pause, or look around, you'll turn into Lot's wife, to a pillar of salt. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And he says the reason Obama struggled on healthcare was not that Americans think that healthcare is in a great situation and they don't want reforms, but he didn't explain exactly what he wanted. He says an informed community does want intelligent change. They're supposed to change the hands of people who don't seem to know what they want or what they're doing. And I think there's truth to that. But the question of how we take corporate money back out of politics is a serious one. And those of us on the left see the left ramping up right now and trying to raise as much money to counter that as possible for 2012. And I mean, to some extent, that hurts on the inside, but it's also how we play the game right now.
You talked about your generation being technocrats, or you're certainly more technology savvy than we are. Always turns to you guys to fix all my problems. Machinery. One of the people who really I have found very inspiring is Jared Duvall, who wrote a book I think it's called The New Democracy. But he talks about using technology as a means of communicating, and that really widely and broadly, and sort of bringing back democracy in a grassroots way, using the power of technology.
Now, this information revolution is fascinating. And this guy Lagos from Chile, Ricardo Lagos, who I'm sure a lot of you remember Pinochet. And this guy was the one who single-handedly had the most important effort to bring him down and end the dictatorship in Chile. He goes on TV. It's the first time there's been a political program in 10 years. And he goes on and he says, they still call it the Lagos finger sometimes in Chile. He says, no Chilean can be so hungry for power. And he promised to lead. And he's a UN special envoy, and he's wildly intelligent. And he compared this to Gutenberg and the printing press, the changes we're in now. He said it took 100 years after that printing press was invented for there to be a newspaper. And then it was 200 more before the French said, let's try this thing called democracy once again. So, his argument is a little idealistic. But these are serious changes. I tried with Facebook for a while, because I think it brings out the worst in us in a lot of ways. And I think it's part of this generation's obsession with celebrity. I mean, if you think about it, that is the most postured and fake self you'll be a lot of times. And what are you really doing? You're sending press releases out to the world. News back to be interested. But when you talk about communicating, right? When you talk about moving information, there's nothing better right now. That is how you do it. So Jared Cohen is a really interesting kid who worked at the State Department until about a year ago. And he was the one in the middle of the Arab or the Iranian Revolution, went to Twitter and said, "You can't do a renovation right now. This matters in the streets of Tehran." So we're still working out how this moves. But the bigger question is, if you can move information well, how good is that information you're moving? I think that talking with Jimmy Carter, he said, "I had this halcyon opportunity to speak truth to the American public." What did you consume as news at that point? 22 minutes in the evening from ABC, NBC, CBS, and these were the Cronkite days, you know? There was a serious attention to details. You had your morning paper, which varied in quality, and I think that this is a question that comes up a lot in this book. Did the digital revolution, in a very paradoxical way, make democracy a lot harder, right? It's still just as hard as it was before to really understand an issue. But it's quite easy to convince people that they get it, scare the crap out of them, and then for them to scare their representatives when they come home in the healthcare debate. So this is a big thing, and we're still trying to work it out. There are two sides to that sword. And there's a really interesting young Russian named Evgeny Voronov, who's writing about, yeah, this stuff's great for the Arab uprising, but these same tools are how a lot of really smart states watch their activists. You know, you see China selling software and technology to a lot of regimes around the world to allow the kind of crackdown they've had in the last 4 months, and know exactly who talks to each other and what they talk about and how dangerous they are. Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on that because I think it's really interesting, you know, and I think that sometimes older generation can sort of use technology as a crutch almost, and the promise of something better to come in the future. They say, you know, as Americans, we always, you know, have great hope for the next big thing that's going to save us and our ingenuity. And I think about the example with the way that the U.S. spreads information, and I had an experience working for the Voice of America, and that's an area where, you know, the way that the U.S. spreads, you know, unbiased, objective information to places where it's restricted is being cut back because they say, you know, we don't need to hire more journalists, you know, spend more money, technology, the internet will take care of it. You know, but like you said, those oppressive regimes are keeping up, you know, much faster, frankly, than I think we are, as far as, you know, China and Iran being good examples. So, you know, what do you think about real cataclysmic points of action for, you know, I guess our generation? Do you think that it's going to take something, you know, that gets fed into the machine, like the example in Tunisia, the, you know, man setting himself on fire, or, you know, it's likely that there's going to be one focal point or one leader who comes and is able to crystallize this and, you know, make it something more tangible? Just wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, I mean, the leader is not a new concept. You know, David talked about how in very dangerous times, charismatic leaders rise. So I don't think there's any question that Helmut Schmidt, this German, to come back to him, there's a bit in Chuck Hagel's memoir, and Hegel is a really great Republican who I hope becomes more involved in politics again. Just one quick aside too, John Huntsman, who was a former governor of Utah, has been the ambassador to China for Obama, who speaks fluent Mandarin and thinks that we can learn things from other cultures. It's a big deal that he runs in this election, and he runs well, because that view isn't held widely on that side of the aisle. But, you know, one of the things Schmidt says is, in talking to Hegel in the Senate offices, there's just no great inspirational leaders on this world stage anymore. You know, this was before Obama came, but Obama, to an extent, is a little lonely out there. You know, Sarkozy, Merkel. There aren't these forces of personality that there used to be. And I say, why is that? And he says, great challenges give birth to great leaders. And I said, are you kidding me? Look at this world. We are not surviving the challenges right now. And he says, I agree. But the perception is that these are further down the line than you and I think. And as long as that remains the case amongst, you know, the general population and the political class, you won't see these terrific personalities, these really inspirational figures popping up. I don't know. It's the real answer.
So one of the charges that my generation says to the millennial generation is that the millennials are ahistorical. I could do some finding you doing homework, but nonetheless, I think it's a fair charge. It is meant as a criticism that you cannot come to any position of without knowing history. The more I think about it, though, the more I'm beginning to think that the rules really are very different now. And even the very nature of the nation state, cluster theory, swarming theory, the way the world functions is becoming totally different. So I'm becoming a bit more open to this ahistorical discussion. So my question is, how do you, if you're putting yourself out as the millennium example, view history?
Yeah.
What do you
I mean, the Western system has been around since 1648, and there was this period in the 90s where we thought it was kind of over. All these economic borders are coming down, the internet's rising, and we said states, this is old news. Then there was 9/11, and all of a sudden borders mattered a great deal more, right? And then there was a financial collapse, and all of a sudden we're Keynesians again. And having a domestic monetary policy matters a lot in the fact that Europe is locked in a currency that fits Germany, but nobody else is having serious implications. Our generation, we're really good at doing exactly what we have to do to get things done. We're not opposed to hard work, but we hate hard work towards uncertain ends, And so if you're writing a paper, you're going to execute it pretty well for a lot of us. But in terms of this general curiosity for the world, and the desire to devour history, or art, or many other things, I think is oddly diminished. And one of the people who writes about this really well, and who has left us, and it breaks my heart, is David Foster Wallace, who wrote a good deal, there it is, he wrote a great deal for Harper's Magazine, but also did fiction. And he writes in this way with these sprawling footnotes and these diatribes and all these things. And his message, overwhelmingly, the mirror to him is a guy named Jonathan Franzen, who had a good deal of fanfare last summer and wrote Freedom and Corrections. The thing Franzen kind of does is take this world around you and throw it back at you. It feels like he knows, your mom and your dad, and has had such a similar life, right? The opposite of that is giving you something that's entirely different, entirely new, and begging you to be curious and to explore. And as we talk about Twitter and Facebook, what does it give you? It gives you stuff it knows you already like, And I think it fits into that ahistorical problem that we can assume we're getting so good at getting exactly what we want. It's auto-tuned and it's overproduced, but somehow it sounds really good to us. And so there's this constant fight in this generation, I think, that I feel like it's starting, where we kind of want to break digital. We kind of want to get back to analog. And you see this with hipsters a little bit. And you see this in other ways. So I don't know. I'm not going to write us off on that count, but it is a problem, I think.
Brian, nice job. Lobbyists and the media really control a lot of what's going on in government today. You touched a little bit on lobbyists. How would you see your generation better managing both media and lobbyists so it's much more positive coming out than the negative?
Yeah, well, the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, is a great friend to my think tank. And he's brutally honest. One of the things he said is that everybody should get to change their name at 18. They know everything about you, right? But one of the other things he said was that it's shocking when you see how it works, the extent to which lobbyists literally write the laws that will then govern them. There's a reason when Barack Obama takes on healthcare, the first thing he does is cut a deal with the pharmaceutical lobby. Doesn't have a chance against them, and he knows it. There's a reason when he sets the climate change legislation, he has John Kerry call T. Boone Pickens. And I'm sure a lot of you remember Swift Boat, right? Ruined the campaign of John Kerry, and it was funded by T. Boone Pickens, who does a good deal with natural gas. And Kerry and him patch it up, and T. Boone Pickens comes to Washington and help writes the natural gas portion of this bill. So, yeah, it's a huge deal. And people have no perception of those two things. A, how much time people have to spend to raise money to get back. And B, the extent to which it's written by the people it governs. I did some stuff on Vermont Yankee in the nuclear industry earlier this year. And they're just completely ahead. The NRC, this body that should be governing, had an order drawn up to shut down the plant over safety concerns. But they didn't do it because it costed $100 million a year to have these things shut down on the order of. So see once out of 40 bureaus around the world, and now they have none. You know? But I think we feel it and we see it, and that's where we have to begin at least. Buddy.
Hey, Brian. I just, my question is sort of like Bob's, but it was that you were talking about Obama earlier in the healthcare, and I'm just wondering, and your suggestion was perhaps not that he wasn't bold enough, but that he wasn't clear enough in spelling out what the plan would be, what his healthcare plan would be.
There was very good reasons for that too,
But I guess my question is, with the 24-hour news cycle and cable news biting at your ankles all day long, and a president being so busy, how do people in positions of power, how do they overcome that? How can they get by that?
There's a good bit when Ron Emanuel was leaving, he used a cuss word that begins with F, and the word together had Nutsville on the end of it, to describe what it's like to try and operate in that constant media stream. It's pretty much impossible, you know? You're literally just looking at your feet as you run, and overwhelmingly, these folks are saying great leaders think 20 years down the line. They can see other generations and what this policy means for them. And a big piece that a number of them said, John Major, who had the cut from the book, in part because I wasn't asking the right questions yet, in part because publishers are fascists, he said, you have to keep a hinterland. You will just get lost in these things. You are asked to make so many decisions. His was cricket and literature. This Paul Keating used to block off 6 hours on Saturdays and just listen to classical music. This guy worships Bruckner and Mahler. He says, with all of the computing power unleashed by the internet age, with all of the knowledge that it's set forth, who could write a Mahler ninth today? You know, and so that was his time. And he says, what it does is it opens your mind, and it demands that you do better. You say, so brave are these people, what I'm doing is infantism, and I must do better. So, also on this, a hot mic, Obama did this tour of Europe before, as he was running for president, and a hot mic caught him talking to David Cameron, who was at that point the leader of the opposition. And Obama says, one of the things I've heard from the Clinton folks is you just need big chunks of time to just sit back and think, to take all this in. And David Cameron says, yeah, we call it the dentist's office. They'd shock you up in 15-minute bursts, and you just have to pound through the day with your note cards, and you have no idea what's happening. You know? It's a big deal, and I think the fact Obama was aware of it and still is struggling to find that time, it sounds like is a testament to how hard it is and how incredible the demands are on these people who do these jobs.
I think it's sort of been alluded to, but let me throw this out there. There's been a lot of articles about how your generation is disconnected from the news. If you look at the polling data, you mentioned network news, which is down a lot, but still you get about 25 million Americans watching the news every night, and it's all old people like me. You can tell by the ads. You feel sick at the end of it. It's one medication after the other. I mean, I've been teaching at St. Michael's now for 24 years, and I, with respect, and I say this to my students, it's not a question of stupidity. I'm not assessing it for intelligence, but the ignorance is frightening, and they're disconnected from the news cycle.
Yeah.
And I speak to colleagues in other institutions. It's not just us. It's UVM, wherever you go.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm very struck by that. I don't know if that mirrors, you're sort of an exception because you're living the news. But my experience with your generation is they're disconnected from the news. And that's tough if you're saying what are the challenges for leaders where you have a large cohort of people who are busy but not civically engaged.
Yeah, I've got the great advantage of being fascinated with all this stuff and intrigued by it, so it's quite easy for me to follow it. But, you'll see Newsweek does a poll out every year, and Pew does it too about Americans and what they know, and it's pathetic. It's always pathetic. It's a third of the country has no idea who the vice president is. People who don't know who Biden is. I mean, now they do because he's dead. Before, he's been in the war for 10 years and you don't know. And, no offense, but you're a professor, and I think that, that's a good thing. So the West German Chancellor, he says, it's the fate of any democracy that those who do vote have no idea what they're doing. So I don't think it's new that people don't really understand what's going on. I think that we have a potential to be much more tuned in than we are. But I'm not sure that it's the great drop-off that people make it out to be.
Yeah.
For those of us that are old enough, like most of the room, if you go way back into news in the Cronkite days, and then there seemed to be a lot of depth and discussion and a bigger soundbite than we get today. And I don't know how anybody can follow the news today, these little 15-second soundbites of everything in the world.
One of the things that strikes me is that a lot of what you see today is great story ideas. You know, you get a really clever thought from some young journalist who's trying to get established, but they don't have the time or the space and maybe the training to really flesh it out and give you 1,200, 1,500 words. And the other thing you find is that in the comments, beneath all these things, are people saying too long. I don't want to read this. And at some point, I just said, I don't care. I'm going to write what I want for however long I want. And if my editors go with it, then that's it. But you're right. I mean, the tenant, you have John King reading you Twitter feeds on CNN. You think that's news? It's embarrassing. And the thing that kills you is when you travel, you watch CNN International. And it's not terrific news. It's not Al Jazeera or BBC, but it's pretty good. And you say, okay, you guys know how to do this. You're sitting in Atlanta deciding you don't want to, right? And it's because news has become entertainment. You know, it's as simple as that. And how we roll that back is a terrific challenge. And it starts with people paying for news, right? I wrote a column at one point that was, I'm the murderer of news. I'm writing for all these papers, but I've realized the amount of money I have ever paid for news was basically nothing. You know, I grew up and there was newspaper, and there was news on TV, and I went to college, and Hearst and New York Times and all these people were literally just putting free newspapers in your dorms because they were desperate to get you to be attached to it. You know, so one day you'd be a subscriber. And now it's on my computer screen. It's on my BlackBerry before I go to bed and when I wake up. So I mean, a lot of it's going to start with us figuring out how print journalism works well in the modern era. In 2008 alone, 6,000 print journalists lost their job. I mean, we're at early 1980s level in terms of the number of print journalists, less than 60,000. And I mean, Jefferson, this is the fourth estate. This is as important as any of those wings of the democracy. So, that's big. Once again, I don't have the answer, but it's the right question to ask. George.
Well, yeah, I think first of all, I want to make a comment, and that's that.
No comments.
Seeing our friends from the Smart Center here from Mount Mansfield High School, it's nice to know that all that tuition money for college was actually not wasted. So that's actually kind of neat to see. But I couldn't resist. Sorry.
There's other people there.
But I have so many questions. The first one is, you talk about transformational leaders, and you talk about Reagan being, agree with him or disagree with him, being a transformational president, and there hasn't been one since. What do you think, how will the next leader be transformational? You have any idea?
I mean, I think that bit in the book is actually Obama saying that, and it's him telling the Reno Gazette editorial board that Clinton was not a transformational leader. Nixon was not. But Reagan, who wasn't terrifically smart, had a very clear vision, and it appealed to people. And he took us from 33% of a GDP deficit up to 55%. I mean, it's not hard to be popular and transformational when you're doing something that easy as giving people money on that large scale. You know, he was transformational in terms of our psychology, but he was also transformational in putting us on a terrible course in terms of debt. You know, so I think the next transformational leader, Barack Obama had the vortex, right? He spoke to this country in a way I had never seen anyone do. You know, there's a theory of great leadership as entrepreneurs of identity. And he really did. He carved out a new identity that was inclusive in nature, that was post-partisan, and then he appointed Rahm Emanuel as a chief of staff. It's sort of like McCain running for president on this message of unity and something bigger, and putting Karl Rove as his chief of staff. You know, that's the parallel you draw. And so the one question that history will have to decide and Obama will never be honest about was if he drank his own Kool-Aid or not. Did he ever really want to try that? Or was he always going to play Washington as old? And I'm not sure that I blame him for playing Washington as old, because it is really hard to take these things in hand. And his healthcare reforms are putting us in a good direction. I'm not sure his financial reforms will matter that much. But he, when you're really honest with the public, and when you reach for something bigger, Jimmy Carter gave this speech in 1979. It's called the Crisis of Confidence speech. And it's unbelievable. A guy who works at the Council of Foreign Relations did a book last year just about this one speech. It's called What the Heck Are You Up To, Mr. President? It's on Google Books. You can read like 20 pages for free. Then you should buy the whole thing. But in this speech, Carter lays out a plan to be energy independent by the year 2000. And he says people in this country are no longer defined by who they are and what they do, but by what they own. And it was, that was a really big, bold message. He had 11 points. Obama just killed the bottom. He got 6 points. You know what I mean? So he spoke in a way, but Reagan absolutely flanked him. And when you're being that honest, when you're talking about things that are really difficult and cut close to home and selling hard political measures, it's very easy to get undercut. So I think the next transformational leader in this country will speak the way Obama did, to higher ideals. But I think he will also manage to carry through on it, or she. That's a big deal. Roe Brooklyn, the woman in this book, she wrote a report in 1986 that said climate change is a huge deal, you need to get on it, turned to the Kyoto Protocol. She also said, if you're serious about international development, the way to do it is with women. And in the last 3 years, maybe 4 years, we've started to figure that out. Muhammad Yunus, microloans, and the idea of the girl effect, which Nick Kristof and his wife wrote a book about. So Obama had a tape leak about 3 weeks ago of him at a fundraiser in Chicago, and he just laid it out. He laid out his arguments in the budget battle. And he did it in a way that was candid and honest, and it was the first time we've seen him do that in a long time. And everybody I know that listened to it, they drank a little bit of that Kool-Aid again. And they said, why doesn't he speak like this to the American public? And I don't know. And I beg that he tells in a second term. And I beg that he has a second term.
Any thought that was an intention?
Sorry,
Any thought that might have been an intentional hot mic when he was?
with Reno,
No, Obama when he was talking about.
Clinton, and Nixon, and Reagan.
No, when he was talking about the economic situation.
I don't. It's impossible to say. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's kind of impression.
Yeah. No, I think listen, he has to do these fundraisers all the time, wherever he goes, because that's the system we built. And I think he obviously understands it'll get out sooner or later, but yes, I don't have an answer on that. Yeah.
I want to fast forward 25 years, and you're president. You seal up there. And, let's just pretend for a minute. You mentioned Iran. Interesting situation. The country mostly young people.
Yeah.
Clearly resentful of the oppression. As you correctly noted, oppressed by a government that's using technology, murdering its own people in the streets, allowing for possible differences in this room, but I don't think those facts are in dispute. What would you do to the young people in Iran, or for young people in Iran who are clamoring for freedom? They're under this oppressive regime that, as I said, is shooting its own people in the street. Now we understand they're helping Syria do the same.
Yeah.
If you were president, given the technology and the means we have today, what would you do? And since you keep talking honestly, so answer honestly.
Yeah. Iran is a very interesting case because of that. They are, in many ways, a very natural ally for the United States, and they were for a while. And they've been a great ally to Israel at times. And right now we see a very interesting fracture between the Supreme Leader and the President. I think that one of the things we forget in this country is that the military often has a huge role in the economies in other countries. And 40% of that economy is controlled by the Revolutionary Guard Corps. And as goes the coup, as goes the revolution, is decided by the military. military as behind Ahmadinejad, and not even Khamenei, let alone Rafsanjani or some of the others who understand the forces of history a little better. Obama ran on a platform of engagement, and Hillary Clinton said he was naive. And he did some superficial stuff towards that direction, but he never took it seriously. Two of the folks that resigned from CIA and the National Security Council when Bush went to war in Iraq are named Flint and Hillary Leverett, and they write a terrific blog about this and about the way one would go about a serious rapprochement with Tehran. I don't think that isolating regimes has ever really worked. I think that this Cuba policy is hysterical, and people know it, but there's no reason to spend the capital, the political capital, to end that embargo, right? And the same thing is true to an extent to Iran. Since '92, the Israelis have been saying, Iran's about to get bombed, Iran's about to get bombed. And somehow they've just never gotten those centrifuges going quite right. And we learned a little about Sputniks and all this recently. So I think I would keep that up. I think I would keep trying to subvert that nuclear program. And I would make serious steps towards a rapprochement and see what happens. Because there's no risk in it. There's nothing.
I don't know, as I'm hearing the dialogue of people in the back, so I'll stand up, as I'm hearing the discussion and the value of it, the different opinions, I kind of have a question I'd like to ask everybody, if you all don't mind. It's like there's an elephant in the room, or an invisible elephant in the room, and that's our democracy. So what I would say is, going, gone is our democracy. I'd be curious, because if we're talking about all these issues, how are we going to rally, like we talked about the people in Europe rallying for healthcare? How are we going to rally if we all don't have a common sense how serious the loss of our democracy is? So I'm just curious how many people might think that our democracy is going or gone? I know I do. Does anyone else have those concerns that our democracy is going or gone?
I think that's...
Because if that's the case, then the question is, what do we do about it, and when are you going to run for president?
I think it's in a dangerous direction, but I think there are good things afoot too. And I think one of the big ways we move towards that is this guy John Pico, this undersecretary, the other night. We were talking about the UN, and almost a year ago to the day, 20,000 Tamils were shelled to death. They were pinned against the beach in Sri Lanka and just laid to waste. And the Secretary General could not get the world's attention in the slightest. And we were talking about that, and he says, when you build an institution for a Cold War world in 1945, the fact you think it can possibly work in 2011 is ridiculous. And people don't want to talk seriously about what can we change in the system and in this country, because there's the fear that you slide and you turn into something that's not at all American. The one thing I would really love is mandatory voting. And the argument against it is that that's your first right in a free society, is not to vote. I reject that. If we're going to take 20, 30% of your income, 50% of your income in taxes, you're spending 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months working for the federal government, essentially. So for me to demand 10 more minutes for you to go and cross out "I don't want to vote" is okay to me. Australia does it well. They have a national holiday, and kids, when they're 17, get bombarded with mail saying, "You better vote, or we're going to fine you." So I think that's a really good place to start, and one that a lot of people aren't nervous about, and aren't nervous about the implications. The right wing is because a lot of people who don't vote are naturally of liberal persuasion. Let's do a couple more, and then I'd love...
Over here. Hi. Voting in democracy, I'm all for it, but my big concern is media and its effect on people's information on the negative. I was really disappointed in going into Iraq, lack of dialogue and serious inquiry as to the validity of the issues at the time.
Yeah.
It committed us to, in effect, a wartime economy in our own country that wasn't funded by raising savings bonds or other issues, but by borrowing money from overseas. So I'm thinking that now. I'm also concerned about lack of correspondence from wire agencies. Overseas, the number of wire agencies is contracted advance in social media, we seem to have opted for convenience to blogging and social media as a source of information and making people aware. Now, this worked to the advantage of Tunisia and also in Egypt, but in Syria, they cracked down on it.
For now, it works in those places.
It worked there, but they've cracked down on Syria. And also in Kashmir, the Indian-controlled portion of Kashmir, the Indian government is monitoring the Twitters, the emails, the web searches, and they're cracking down on people that are doing anything they find suspicious.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about it.
Yeah, I definitely am too. I don't know if there's a question in that though.
Do you share the concern that I have, which is with the decline in the educational level of the populace? I mean, it's one thing to say, I mean, that's...
We're mid-pack. In the OECD, in developed nations, we are literally the worst in terms of income disparity. And we're at best sort of mid-pack on education stuff.